Hi, everybody. I'm sports psychologist Dr. Andrew Jacobs. I'm the host of the Sports Psychology Hour on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. It's a radio show that airs every Sunday morning from 7 8 a.m. Central Time. I've been on the radio for 32 years. I'm in my 43rd year of work as a sports psychologist. And I'd like to welcome you to this live stream event. Over the past few years, in addition to my radio show, I've launched the Sports Psychology Hour as a podcast and now via live stream on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, or I guess X, not Twitter, and YouTube. And I want you to invite you to visit my website, which is winnersunlimited.com, where you can click on the podcast tab and listen to episodes of my show. We've got close to 10 years of podcasts on there. I've interviewed all kinds of people all over the place in the world of sports. And that's winnersunlimited.com. And I want to invite you to visit. Make sure you follow my social media pages at DRJ Sports Psych on Twitter, Facebook.com/Sports Psychology Hour on Facebook, and at Dr. Andrew Jacobs on YouTube. And we're doing a new series of conversations focusing on coaches and athletes. And tonight, I'm really excited to talk to Siobhan St. John. I knew I'd get it wrong. Okay, St. John. She's at The Ohio State University as the assistant cheerleading coach. Siobhan, thanks for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to hearing from you. You've got this extensive background. We could talk for hours about it. But thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So tell me, you're a cancer survivor. You're an author. You were with the Brooklyn Nets dance team. You've got this incredible background and experience. How'd you get into all this stuff? What got you involved?
Yeah, I would say my parents. My mother was a dancer. My dad has been in, bodybuilding and sports since I can remember. And I think the love of sports and being creative in the dance world is really what got me involved in cheering and dancing. And then took me to the NBA and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I got into coaching.
What do you like about coaching? What's the aspect of it that you like? And also, what are the parts of it that can be frustrating? Because I've worked and talked to coaches at all levels, from youth sports to the Olympic and professional level. What do you see the pros and cons of it being for you as a former athlete yourself?
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is by Benjamin Disraeli, and it's, "The greatest good you can do for another is not just share your riches, but to reveal to them their own." And that's what I love about coaching. It's the ability to share the gifts that I've been given and the things that I've learned along the way, and then watch the athletes I coach discover their own gifts and discover things that they necessarily didn't know about themselves. So I love that aspect of coaching. And that's kind of why I've gotten into it. And I'd say the cons of it is you want that so badly sometimes for athletes, for student athletes. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you might like. And, I've been coaching now for 22 years. So from a junior high level to a high school level and now at a collegiate level, you can see that in all three levels where you want so badly for someone to be able to kind of get that light bulb moment quicker than they are ready to have that light bulb moment.
What you mentioned mental health, and obviously you know about that quite a bit. I've noticed in the past 5 to 8 years, we're seeing mental health being talked about so much by people in the sports world.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing professional athletes, Olympic athletes, like Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, Michael Phelps, Kevin Love, all these athletes coming out and talking about why mental health is so important, why self-confidence is important, why dealing with your issues is important. Why do you think that's become a topic of late that people are looking at? I've talked about forever. I've been a sports psychologist for 43 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with the Olympic team, with professional teams, the college teams. And I can't tell you how many times people said, "Oh, we don't need you around. We don't need that." Athletes, they don't need that type of stuff. And I'm like, athletes are people. They've got emotions. They've got feelings. They get depressed. They get happy. They get stressed. They've got to deal with this stuff just like anybody else. They may be physically superior than the rest of us, but they're still people. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's something that people have talked about for some time. However, it hasn't been as prevalent as it is now. And I honestly think it's just because you have a generation of student athletes who are open and able to share about things that they're going through and see that there is a support system. I think there are larger support systems now for people to share how they are feeling. And I think it's a benefit in for any athlete, to be able to express yourself, to get that mental health support is only a benefit to you as a person and also on the field, on the court, in the gym, in the pool, wherever it might be. So I just honestly think it's the society that we're in now and the platform that students have with it being with social media, with it X or IG or Facebook, whatever it might be. I think there is a greater platform for people to be able to express themselves in that way.
What do you see in your coaching world
Hmm.
as a former professional athlete, as a professional dancer and a cancer survivor? You've been through a lot of things. You've experienced a lot of things. What do you see? Let's talk about the collegiate athletes because that's who you work with.
Right.
What do you see as the big stressors for them, the big anxieties for them? I encourage, and we're on social. I talk about this every week. We're on social media, but I encourage all the professional athletes I work with to stay off of social media during their competitive season
Hmm.
because if they screw up, miss a kick, to strike out, miss a shot, everybody tells them how awful they are. And if they make those shots or make the field goals, they're the greatest person in the world. And
Right.
that's for people that don't know them at all. They don't know about them personally. They just see them as an athlete. So, from a collegiate perspective, right now, what do you see the big stressors, the big anxieties, the big pressures, and how do you as a coach help them deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's this idea of perfection, of having to be perfect and not make a mistake. You can't get something wrong. The whole world is watching, right? That is a stressor in itself. And then understanding that you have to make the grades. You can't be a competitive athlete if you're not competitive in the classroom as well, right? So you have your personal life, you have school life, you have your sport. All three of those things tie together and can become stressful for anyone. And I think what we do a really great job at Ohio State is we provide all student athletes with that mental health support, right? So every student athlete has access to mental health psychologists and sports psychologists at Ohio State. So for our program specifically, I would say every other week we do have someone from our sports psychology department come in and talk to our student athletes, and they get to pick the topic. So they get to decide, what is it that you want to talk about, and you want to get tools. We tell them all the time, we want to get tools in your toolbox, right? Provide you with these resources so that when you do have those stressors, when you are feeling anxious, or you feel like you're at that point where maybe it's a breaking point, you have tools and resources that you can use, and they're always at your disposal. Like they're always there. So those are a couple of the things that we always do at Ohio State specifically.
Well, you're at an extremely prestigious school that has
Hmm.
accessibility to these
Yes.
resources, which obviously aren't available at a lot of places. So, from your perspective as a coach, what do you see the stressors today for collegiate athletes? From looking at it from your background and looking at it from your experience, what do you see the biggest issues they've got with today? And if you didn't have the accessibility to resources like you did, how would you as an assistant coach or a head coach help them work through those things?
Yeah, I'm telling the biggest stressors I see are just when personal and professional life collide, right? And having to deal with, again, being an athlete at an elite level, making sure you're making the grades, so staying on top of your schoolwork. Then you have your personal life outside of you as an athlete, and then dealing with all of the ins and outs that come with social media. So you may want people to stay off of social media, however, that's not the reality that most of these athletes live in nowadays. It's so accessible. So I think it's just really important for the student athletes that I coach. And luckily for my background, I do have a background in psychology as well. I have my master's in psychology. So I just tell them all the time, the door is always open. You can always talk to me. There's always an open line of communication so that they understand that there is somebody here who supports them and who wants to see them win, who wants to see them succeed. And that doesn't mean just as an athlete, it means in totality. as a whole person. I want to see you succeed inside this university, but I want to see you succeed when you leave this university, because you won't be a college student forever.
Well, you hope they won't. There are some that want to say that way. Um, so when I'm listening to you, the word that pops in my mind is balance. And that's something I talk to athletes about all the time. How do you balance everything out? You
Right.
know, and balance doesn't mean everything's equal. It means there's different times when different things are really important.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the academic stuff, you've got the social life, you've got the athletic components, all these different components fit together. And so one of the things you have to try to do as a coach is you got to understand where they're coming from. And so how can you help a lot of these young people get through some of that stuff with your experience? Obviously it's an extensive background. How can you help them when they come to you? Because I always say a good coach is a good psychologist. A great coach is a great psychologist. So what do you say that you can do to help them out with?
Yeah, it's teaching them those time management skills. I think the more time you have honing that skill specifically, the easier things become, right? When you can decide, okay, what needs the most attention right now and what can I do next? And having those things listed will help you inevitably go, okay, I can manage this and then I can move on to this, kind of creating that checklist, right? So if any athlete comes to me and they're dealing with a specific issue, we would discuss how to figure out what we need to do in that issue, right? And try to take out all of the things that don't necessarily matter for that time. And I think those are really big things. Is we take every little thing and everything becomes so much larger. It's like adding a rubber band to a ball, and you keep adding a rubber band, you keep adding it, and it just gets larger and larger and larger. So it's figuring out in those moments, okay, well, what do we not need to add? If we don't need to add that, let's take that off the list. What's the most important thing right now? And then the more you can make those smaller for students, the easier things become to digest. It's like, oh, okay, I can handle that. I can do that. If I think of all of this, that's a stressor that might cause anxiety. But if I think of just this aspect, I can tackle one thing at a time. So that's really what I try to do as a coach, is just show them that things are able to be digested.
Do you find with athletes today that there's more of a sensitivity to stress and being depressed and acknowledging that and then confronting that and dealing with that than say maybe 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think 20, 15 years ago, you weren't talking about it, right? That conversation wasn't as, again, as prevalent as it is now. So to have that type of conversation then, when I was in college and growing up, it was a little more like, I don't know what somebody's going to think of me. Where now that conversation is a lot more, people view it in a different light in today's age, in today's day and age. I think people understand, hey, like you said earlier, we're dealing with all aspects of a person. It's not just the athlete, it's not just the student. You're dealing with every aspect of that person, whether you'd like to or not. That's what it is. Especially when you're a coach, you are dealing with outside influences, parents, you're dealing with professors, um, and things that come with the job in the sense of coaching in the gym, all of those things. So I think that's a big part of it.
So along the lines of what you just said there, could you share a scenario you've had to deal with along with some of those things that you've had to help athletes work through in terms of balancing all that out?
Yeah, I mean, prime example, we compete for a national championship in cheerleading. And that time of the year, which we are currently in, can be extremely stressful, right? Talk about our program specifically. We cheer at football, men's and women's basketball, and women's volleyball games. So you're talking about three other seasons: football, basketball, and volleyball, as well as practice season for our national team. All of those combined on top of staying on top of academics, that could be stressful for anyone. So throughout our season, we again prepare the students that we coach on how to deal with things that they're going to come up against, whether that's a mental block, whether that is you are not doing as well as you'd like to in class, you're not getting the grades that you might like. And we sit down and we're like, okay, well, let's figure out how we can get to a better place. So those are things that I deal with on a daily basis. And I'm grateful that coaching has taught me how to deal with people because that's a big part of coaching.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, a great coach is a great psychologist because they have to be able to comprehend and understand where that athlete's coming from, where they're going, and what's the journey to get them there. And
Right.
everybody's in a different place. You know, you're on a cheerleading team. You got to work together to do the drills and the competitions. But you've got, I mean, how many young ladies are out there at the same time?
So I coach a co-ed team.
They
We
always
have
going to ask, is it a
18,
co-ed?
yep, 18 men and 17 women.
So you've got 35 people out there.
Yeah.
Okay, which means you have 35 people coming from 35 different places, all trying to go to the same one together.
You got it.
What are the big obstacles you have to deal with trying to get all them to work together?
I think it's just learning personalities. When I come in as a coach, right? Myself, our head coach, there's the two of us, our assistant coach, and then, as you said, 35 athletes. It's going to take me a little bit longer to understand each athlete versus 35 athletes understanding three coaches, right? It's going to take them a little less time to understand the ins and outs of how we coach versus how they need to be coached. But what I tell them all the time, I may coach one way, so I'm very visual, so I might explain something a little bit more visually versus our head coach may explain something a different way. And I tell them, if you don't understand how I'm explaining it, ask ask our head coach. They may
Speak.
explain it in a different way that you're like, "Oh, that's what you're saying. I got it." And vice versa. He may say something and I can say the same exact thing in a very different way and they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, got it. We're good now. Cool." And that's one of the things that I love about it is like, "Hey, we don't want anybody to be the same. If we wanted the same people, we would have the same people. We don't want that. We want variety. We want you to be different." And it's that challenge of learning 35 individuals.
Is there a difference coaching male and female athletes for you on a team like this?
Yeah, yes, there's a difference. I wouldn't say it's a huge difference. However, I would say our female student athletes, again, the way I explain things to them may be very different than the way I can explain it to our male athletes. Um, Most of the male athletes that I've coached, they can get things a little bit quicker. Like, oh, okay, I get that. I understand what you're saying. The female athletes that I coach, they get everything that I'm saying to them. However, they usually need more of that visual explanation, right? So I think that
It's
those are
interesting. Interesting. Sorry to interrupt you. It's
no,
interesting
you're
you're
good.
saying it like that because what you're saying is male athletes interpret things differently than female athletes do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all of my athletes interpret things differently, though, right? So
From each
I can
other. Yeah.
explain. Yeah, I can explain. For example, we have what we call middle layers, and those are our top girls that hold our tippy tops. So there's 2.5 high pyramids that we have. And I can explain something to our middle layers visually, and they're like, okay, got it. And I'd have to explain it differently to our top. So it's just, it just depends on the athlete.
What's been the biggest challenge you've had as a coach? And then I want to go to your time as a dancer with the Brooklyn Nets, comparing that question to when you were dancing.
Yeah. I'd honestly say my most difficult time as a coach is just the changing of the times, right? Working through a pandemic, coaching through a pandemic, coaching through, you know, civil unrest, coaching through political change. Growing up as a coach, when I first started, I never imagined I'd have to deal with those outside things. I thought coaching was just the X's and O's, right?
Just coaching.
just coaching, right? And that was my mentality. And as I've gotten older and times have changed, I have to adjust as a coach. I can't stay the same, or else I'm not going to be a great coach.
So
And
let me interrupt you there. So how
yeah,
have you changed? What have you done to change?
I learn from my athletes. I try to listen as best as I can. I don't always get it right. I've gotten it wrong so many times, I'm sure. But I try to listen to them to understand, how do they need to be coached. I can't coach a 23-year-old the same way I coached a 14-year-old. It's two very different things. So I've had to evolve through each of those stages in coaching. And athletes teach me every year. Every year I come back, I'm learning something different from the year before, because the athletes continue to evolve as well.
In my office on my desk at work, I have a golf driver head, just the head of the driver, that's
Mhm.
reformed into a pelican head. It's real hard. And then I have a figurine of Gumby,
Okay.
the green, and the Gumby thing is flexible and shakes. The driver's head is solid and stiff. And I always ask the athletes, well, which one are you? Are you flexible or are you stiff? And if you're stiff, you're not going to change. If you're like Gumby, you got to adjust.
Right.
I think with athletes today, with all the social issues, the political issues, all the things going on, that affects us all, and it affects athletes too. So
Hmm.
they have to be able to deal with that in the same way you have to deal with it. And so working together, I always talk about 4 keys to success: preparation, focus, attitude, and confidence. Preparation is about how you get ready mentally, physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, nutritionally.
Hmm.
Focus is about what are you concentrating on, but what are the distractions in your head and externally. Attitude, I always say, you can have a positive, negative, or realistic attitude, and then the foundation of all that's confidence. And confidence to me is a reflection of those things, but it's also a reflection of your background and your past successes and failures. And I found that the athletes who really become successful, they've got that confident level that they've learned to acquire and build on how they failed in the past. What do you
Hmm.
think about that?
Yeah, absolutely agree.
So when you dance professionally with the Nets, tell us a little bit about that. What was the fun part about that? Maybe what was the frustrating part about that? If you'll share that with us.
It was the greatest time of my life. I would not change it for anything.
Well, your face just answered that without.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't put into words how grateful I am for that experience. It taught me so much. I grew so much as a dancer, but I grew as a person. The family and friends I've gained from those 8 years dancing in the NBA is unbelievable. And then just the opportunity to travel the world, the countries that I've been to, and being able to experience different cultures, different people, different foods, has been an experience that I'm really, really grateful for.
What would have been one of the more frustrating aspects of doing that?
Honestly, I'd say, I mean, it's grueling, right? We practice a lot, we're learning things quickly, we're turning around and having to perform those things. And those times can be grueling. However, it's so rewarding when you get to see the final product, getting on the court and being able to perform in front of thousands of people. That's the highlight of it. But it's the behind the scenes that most people don't get to see. That is the grueling part to it. But again, that part also has its joy too.
You've survived cancer, as have I. Um, how did that whole experience help you and possibly change you in the way you look at things?
Yeah. So I was 18 months old when I was diagnosed with cancer. So the beginning stages of it, I don't remember very well. However, once I was in remission, I was still in and out of hospitals for about the next 14 years after I was in remission. And it completely taught me how to be resilient, right? How to bounce back from anything, whether it good, bad, different, ugly, it didn't matter what it was. I was going to figure out a way to bounce back, to do it, to get it right. And I'm extremely grateful for that ability to know I can be resilient in any circumstance. So yeah, and congratulations. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, yes, I survived prostate cancer 6 years ago, and fortunately, I'm still here as a result of that.
Blessing.
Well, thank you. You know, as I've listened to you talk here today, I can't imagine that anyone who's been coached by you will keep a relationship with you for years because of the, I can tell your personality, your excitement, your knowledge. I'm sure people have stayed in touch with you long after they've left Ohio State.
They have, and I appreciate it. It always warms my heart to hear from former student athletes.
And isn't that in the end part of why you coach? I mean, you're coaching to try to win national championships and things like that, but at the same time, I think you're really coaching to develop relationships that don't end when they graduate. It's something that continues on afterwards. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, to see students get married, to have children, to create families of their own, those are honestly some of the greatest moments as a coach.
Yeah, I know in my work, I mean, I've now actually I've been doing this so long. I've seen kids of clients I started with years ago, and I've actually had a couple of professional athletes who sent their grandkids to me,
Wow.
which has been pretty amazing. Former baseball players with the Kansas City Royals when I was their team psychologist in 1990. I've had two players on that send their grandkids to me.
That's awesome.
I think when you develop these relationships, when you help people like you're doing, I think those athletes appreciate what you do and what you give, and that says a lot about you as a person. And obviously, the fact you maintain this relationship with so many people afterwards, it really just talks about who you are. So, I appreciate you joining us tonight. This has been a great interview. I know I've got 3 questions I ask everybody when we finish up. I want to get your definitions of 3 words.
Oh boy. All right.
All right, Siobhan. So the first one is, what is your definition of winning?
It's so we talk about this all the time. It's John's wooden definition of success. It's like that inner peace of knowing you did the best that you could do. That's winning.
I agree with you 100%. That's how I define it. Did you do the best you could that day? It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with what place you came in. It's did you do your best?
Yeah.
Your definition of losing.
My definition of losing is learning, which isn't losing. It's like you haven't lost anything. Did you learn something? You didn't lose.
Perfect. Yeah, because you're not going to lose. And then finally, what's your definition of self-confidence?
Oh, that's a good one. My definition of self-confidence is when you look in the mirror, do you like what you see? And not aesthetically. Do you know who you are? Because when you know who you are, I think that's where self-confidence comes from because it cannot be changed from anybody else.
Wow, that's heavy. I like that. Listen, this has been fascinating talking with you tonight. I really appreciate you joining us. If people like to get a hold of you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram at SIO711. So that's SIO 711. Also, my website where you can purchase a book is SiobhanSt.John.com. It's my full name without the period, stjohn.com. Those are the best ways.
The title of your book is?
It's Scars Left to Heal. This wonderful thing right here.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's called Scars Left to
Well,
Heal.
listen, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I want to love to keep in touch with you. This has been a fascinating interview with you. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you again for having me.
You're welcome. And if you enjoyed our conversation, visit my website, which is winnersunlimited.com, where you can click on the podcast tab, listen to episodes of my show, and connect with me and find out more information. That's winnersunlimited.com. So everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Okay, take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.